Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Geo and Joey show from Oklahoma. Joey, how you doing? And introduce our guest today.
Doing better than I deserve. So our guest today is a friend from the what are we calling it now? X, I guess, ways, and we got to know each other through an initiative that we're both involved with, the Reagan Caucus and the Reagan Underground Chat, and also the Freeman newsletter, which was a product on Substack to try to restore America's constitutional founding. But anyway, this is Lincoln Gaffney, and we're going to talk
Yes,
about some new projects he's got going. But how you doing, Lincoln?
yes. Doing pretty well, Joey. Good to see you.
Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, first of all, before we get into kind of conversation about your background and stuff, what is the new project that you've launched and that you want to get going forward?
So the new project that I've just launched is called Liberty for the Young. It is supposed to be a new Substack-based website that focuses on a traditionally conservative viewpoint and opinions, however, almost exclusively done through young writers. Because one of my main goals for this project is to get and provide a good traditionally conservative way of thinking and provide that to young people because I think that it's severely lacking in modern conservative media.
So, speaking of young people, as you mentioned, what gets you into this kind of endeavor, right? You're young yourself. A lot of people your age are playing video games till 3 in the morning and wasting their life away, smoking things they shouldn't be smoking, drinking things they shouldn't be drinking. What attracted you to want to be involved in this manner?
What really attracted me was the fact that I grew up very involved in learning about history and government. My dad was a big influence in that, always got me the latest material in that. And so I always had this intellectual basis for politics that while I was in high school, I started to actually properly develop into wanting to, okay, this is a place I want to do as a proper career.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Joe.
So my other question, obviously, I know you because of the circles we run in. I know that you're critical of elements of the current conservative movement, or what calls itself the conservative movement. Um,
Yes, the conservative movement.
including President Trump. Well, I think we would both agree he's done some good things. There's
Yeah, oh yeah.
problematic aspects to it, but I'm a little bit older than you, and so I can kind of remember like George Bush's presidency, like a post or a pre-Trump Republican Party. But at least for all of your voting, wait, are you even old enough? You're old enough to vote, right?
Yes.
I am old enough to vote. I was not old enough to vote in the 2024 election, which just shows you
Okay.
how young I am.
Yeah. So exactly. So your entire your political life has basically been Trump years. So how did
Yes.
you kind of become, because it's hard to be different than the movement around you. So what kind of inoculated you from certain elements of that?
Well, I really started to develop a more traditional Reaganist sort of conservative viewpoint, mostly because my dad is very similar to this. He was very critical of Trump, did not vote for him in 2016 or 2020, voted independent both those times. So, and he always criticized Trump from in the sense of, okay, he's not being an actual conservative, especially a fiscal conservative. And so it's mostly kind of going from that, reading a bunch of books about Reagan, about Buckley, about Friedman, that type of stuff.
Very good. Um, Trying to think. So, what would you say? Because the people, your peers and stuff that you talk to, what would you say? Do most of them have like an idea, kind of their conservatism, or would you say it's mostly like vibes and feels? Because you mentioned like Buckley and Friedman. Is that kind of would you say most of your peers that on the right are familiar with those, or do you say they've kind of become a lost art?
They've kind of become a lost art in the sense of the fact that Buckley and Friedman, for a lot of guys under 25, they were already dead by the time we were both came around into politics, long dead actually at that point. So for a lot of them, they first got exposed to conservative content through like YouTube, and that is not necessarily the best place to get that because YouTube is full of basically a bunch of kind of MAGA style grifters that really only spew this particular viewpoint because it's very popular and gets them a lot of views and money. And so, even though I mentioned these types of figures, most of my peers on the right at my age probably are not aware of them.
You know, going back to your peers, you being younger, those, how do you attract them into a movement like this and to think beyond just, party on the weekend?
Well, I think I try to do it by telling them how Trump is, 78 years old. He is not going to be the leader of the party for much longer. By the time most of us are out of college, he will probably be, he'll definitely be out of his second term, if not basically retiring from politics. And we need to figure out, okay, what is the movement of conservatism after him? Because Trump personally is very popular with a lot of young people on the right, but after him, no real allegiances. So I want to encourage them to understand, like, okay, the GOP does not end once Trump leaves office. We need to figure out, okay, what does it mean to actually be a conservative in the 21st century?
Are many of your peers even talking about this, or are they just like, for example, where does a person like Charlie Kirk fall into this influence? Because he's popular in college campuses. Because of him, a lot of people in college had a good turnout. And so, where do you see the young people in relation to him and beyond Trump, as you were alluding to?
I would say a lot of them are attracted to Trump because of his ability to talk in very simplified ways that a lot of young people can easily understand, even if they don't have a big educational background. And they are attracted to the way that he's gotten a lot of conservative thinkers online into being very pro-Trump. I don't think it's actually like they agree with his politics much. I think it's more just, oh, yes, this guy's cool and he goes viral on TikTok all the time, so therefore I'm going to support him. It's not this actual deep, okay, I looked at all of Trump's policies and I agree with X, Y, and Z, therefore I support him.
So one question. So obviously, I agree with a lot of the criticisms of Trump. I myself didn't vote for him this time around. I did vote for him the first two. January 6th was something that I still couldn't look past. But there was still, and there was a part of me when the election results came in that, yes, I knew that in the Republican Party, we still have a restoration work to do to kind of get to the Reaganite principles that I care about: free markets, limited government, social conservatism, right? Like kind of the rooted pillars, right? The three stool. But there was still a part of me that breathed a sigh of relief that Kamala Harris wasn't going to be president.
Yes. As
So
much as I
how
dislike Trump, I dislike Kamala a whole lot more.
agreed. So, but I guess what would you say, like steel manning your like kind of the younger peers, kind of the new Gen Z crowd, the podcast crowd that likes Trump? What would you say are the positives of the Trump years that say the new Republican Party or the new Reaganites 2.0 should learn from and carry on while maybe distancing itself from some of the more toxic elements?
I would say the biggest long-term benefit that the Trump years have had in terms of policy making has been the fact that Trump was actually able to get traditionally conservative judges on the Supreme Court. And that is going to lead to a lot of long-term conservative victories. However, I would say the thing that he has done best in terms of getting a movement is the fact that Trump in the past election learned that the way that you reach millions of people is not through traditional media means like doing television interviews. It's through going on podcasts and getting clips from said podcast and going viral online. So I think that's a strategy that I think post-Trump Republican Party needs to take, because
Well,
that's where all the young people are.
um, the word on the street was that his son gave him that idea, right, to go on Rogan
Yes.
and that other guy. But we see that it's taken, at least for this administration, it has taken some practical steps, because we have now non-traditional media in the White House briefings with,
Yes.
I think Daily Wire is there, and some others. So maybe it's a
Yeah,
dawn of a new
I
era.
filled out an application, so
Go Joey. No, but that's good, right? Because I think, and from what we've been learning here from Doge, that traditional media has been getting money. Like, I know political was mentioned, and so
Yes.
it's good to be able to go to more independent media that tries to
Yes.
at least play it down the middle to reach the young people. Because look, you guys, I don't want to say you guys are the future. You guys are the now. And so the old heads like myself, I'm 51. I could be your father. Um,
Yes, you are actually
right.
about the age of my father.
Okay, yeah. So, it's not that you guys are the future. We need to team up, right? Old and young. Those
Yes.
who especially are able to vote to maintain, freedom. This whole podcast
Mhm.
is about liberty of conscience. And so going to that point, what is this Substack? Tell us about the Substack and what you have going there.
Yes, so I started the Substack in 2023 when I was 16, because I wanted to use it as my own personal Substack to kind
Mm-hmm.
of get some stuff published, and then see, okay, can I go towards getting published in a proper newsletter?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, I heard from a mutual friend about the Freeman newsletter, because he was like one of the founding contributors there. And so I then got connected with Justin Stapley, who lives 25 minutes away from me.
Mm.
And we were able to connect. I was able to get most of my writing done through that angle. However, once he announced a couple months ago that he's turning it back into his personal Substack and it's not going to be the Freeman newsletter, at least for now, that I was like realizing, okay, now I need to figure out how am I going to continue improving my writing, and so that's where the idea came for the Substack.
Mm-hmm. And well, what's the main premise behind it? I see the title is what? Liberty for the Young?
Yes. So the main premise is going to be to get from the perspective of young conservative thinkers, like how to drive the ship and the ideas of conservatism towards the traditional Reaganite viewpoint, being told to young conservatives by young conservatives.
Joey?
so we'll dive into that a little bit. So on
Yes.
the Reaganite side of things, I know what makes him one of my all-time favorite presidents and probably my favorite president of the 20th century. But what is it specifically, singularly about Reagan and Reagan conservatism that you find most compelling for the problems of the 21st century and particularly of your peers, right, and Gen Z?
Well, I think it's because when I go back and I read what Reagan was running on in 79, 1980, when he was first running on, a lot of the issues that he was talking about then are either the same or in worse shape now. If we talk about government debt, well, that was probably about $1 trillion when he first took office. Now it's 35 trillion. If we talk about the issues of marriage and divorce and this and that, was already crumbling for about 15 years at the time Reagan had started. We're now 55 years into into that whole issue that a lot of young people don't really remember a time when marriage was seen as this stable institution that you could rely on. And then if we talk about the foreign policy, yes, he's talking about the Soviet Union that, of course, no longer exists. But a lot of the same policies are in certain ways being pursued by modern day Russia and China, especially. And we need to take similar actions as what he pushed for to get the Soviet Union to fall, but obviously using modern technology.
Very good. Um, I like that you hit all in that answer, right? Because one of the things that's sometimes bothered me is certain people who kind of want to, in the right, who kind of want to move past Reagan. They call it zombie Reaganism or whatever. One of the things they'll say is that Reagan's three-legged stools, right, kind of limited government, and like libertarian economists, national security hawks, and then the social conservatives. This was just an ad hoc Cold War thing to beat the Ruskies, but there's no internal logic. And yet, in your answer, you actually referenced all three legs of the stool as being important, right? Whether it's the issue of crumbling marriage rates, whether it's the national security risks, and then you also talked about the budget. And so do you see kind of an internal logic to kind of Reagan and obviously Frank Meyer's project, or do the critics, do they have something?
I will say, in a little bit in terms of appeasing the critics, is that I do agree that one of the issues that some Reaganite conservatives have is that they like to talk in that it's the exact same as the 1980s. And it's not the exact same. It's very similar issues that we're facing, but it's still a very different time period. And thus, it needs to be kind of spearheaded by people that are not the same as that were leading it in the 1980s. And so I think one of the main issues that they face nowadays is that a lot of the main talking heads for Reaganite conservatism are all 50, 55, 60, or even older. So I think that's one of the main issues that they face is that it's sometimes portrayed, at least to young people, as this is an aging ideology filled with mostly older men, when it absolutely is not. It's a philosophy that can be applied to men and women of every age, and thus I think that's what the main issue they're facing now. But it's not really a thing to the critics. It's just more of a observation that I've noticed about Reagan conservatism.
Yeah, so it's applying eternal principles to changing political circumstances.
I think you worded that well.
Yeah, we have to do that with everything, right? The principles are, including the Bible, right? The principles are what's eternal, right? The application changes simply because we're in the United States and not 2,000-year-old, Israel. When it comes to liberty, one of the highest forms is religious liberty. With the rise of Christian nationalism, what does your generation think about it? What do they say? Do you mainly roll in Christian circles or other faith circles? And what are you hearing?
So I go to a private Catholic school, so obviously I mostly interact with those of Roman Catholicism. It's still a new Catholics in terms of the fact that they do the Mass in English and accept Vatican II most of their reforms. And I talk to people mostly in Christian conservative circles. And what I've noticed with a lot of young people is that they like the aesthetic of Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy particularly, but they don't understand the true substance of what that actually means. So they like, oh yes, the beautiful architecture or the traditional writings, but they do not actually take to heart what those are supposed to mean and actually applying that in their daily lives.
I've kind of sensed that, and my buddy Dennis Sotheby, Gio and I's friend Dennis Sotheby, has said in a podcast we did once The Christian nationalists seem to want Christian laws, Christian leaders, Christian countries, Christian institutions, but everything but Christian hearts in Christian people. And
Oh yes, because
the
if you talk a
gospel,
lot of these super quote unquote Christian people, they do not act in a very Christ-like manner, and in fact do a lot of things that would be considered very offensive and very sinful. And so, oh yes, you can claim to be all super pro Christianity, but if you're committing inconstant sin and you're not engaging in helping out your fellow man, then you're not really a true Christian.
Which is why, for example, legalism is usually a cover for sin. See, because
Yes.
if the legalist can get society to behave the way he views it, then he knows how to manipulate the system, right? And so that's why they are so rigid in wanting it to be one way, but true love is sloppy, right?
Yes.
The way you deal with one person caught in adultery may be totally different than how you deal with somebody else caught in adultery. And so this rise of Christian nationalism, and I go back to that, they want all the trappings of Christianity so they could be left alone to do their shenanigans, right? It's almost like
Yes.
they know how far they can go to still be called a Christian, yet
Yeah.
not live.
And the thing is that they know neither
Christ-like.
what being a Christian means or even what nationalism even means. Because if you take nationalism in its original European sense, it's supposed to be this like ethnic and specific country pride, even though that is completely against traditional Christian teachings, because it teaches that, okay, the words and actions of Christ should be followed by everybody. This isn't things regulated to one tribe in Israel 2,000 years ago. It is eternal teachings and truths that you can learn from Christ's teachings that can be
Which
applied
is-
forever, everywhere.
Which is, I can give myself a plug here for my series that I'm going to be doing in the book of Revelation. Revelation 14, 6, and 7 talks about preaching the everlasting gospel to every tongue, tribe, nation. So it transcends borders, right? It transcends
Yes.
nationality. It transcends individual groups because it's a global everlasting gospel. And that's what Christian nationalism here especially fails to see. And the book of Revelation talks about how, especially chapters 13 and 14, but you see it in but that's a crescendo, that people are going to want to force spirituality by legislative law. And that's what we have to be leery about. Somebody send me something today that they are trying to pass a bill to mandate the Bible and Bible reading in all schools.
Yeah,
Now, look,
I believe that was in Oklahoma. And I remember also hearing that I believe it was the Idaho legislator that says that they passed a bill saying that marriage is defined legally in their state as between a man and woman. That'll be interesting to see how the Supreme Court deals with that issue. Because on that issue, I think there's a strong originalist argument that, what was it? I forget what the Supreme Court case was. Obergefell, that made it a federal thing.
Yeah.
I could absolutely see.
I actually think that decision may get changed in our lifetime. And not because of Trump or anything like that. I just think eventually people are just going to come to their common sense. I mean, you don't
Yes, and I think people are also going to realize that the argument of making this primarily a federal issue instead of an issue that is decided on the state-by-state issue is the wrong way to approach this. And also, they have the wrong idea of what marriage is supposed to be. They think that marriage is primarily a government saying you two are married for the issue of taxes so you can file together. When no, marriage is a religious ceremony given usually by a priest in a church that says that you two are making a covenant with each other and with God to stay together and to get get married, have kids, raise a family. That is what marriage truly is. It's not just something that the government says for tax reasons.
I mean, to even the government, and part of the reason I think it's going to be overchanged, even without religious argument, is that the government is going to see that it's actually undermining its own foundation, right? Marriage and children, the family, the nuclear family, is the foundation of a good government. You start
Yes.
screwing with that, and you're, pulling the rug underneath yourself. Go ahead, Joey.
Well, first of all, I'll just say I hope you're right. I'm actually less optimistic. I think Obergefell was terribly decided. I do think that the state has an interest in recognizing what marriage is,
Mm-hmm.
mainly for the sake of children. And listen, I don't want to live in a society where necessarily adults who are just minding their own business are persecuted. But also, Pete, Pete and Chase and Buttigieg are not fathers, right, in the traditional sense, right? Like their kids
Correct.
need a and so I don't think that's hateful. I just think it's true, right? Babies need daddies, and babies need mommies. But unfortunately, even most Republicans today disagree with that, and there's been polls on that. And so,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, you're right. Hopefully, the zeitgeist changes on that. We will see. I
Yeah.
did
I
want to
think
ask.
the best
Now,
we can
now,
hope for now.
go
Oh,
ahead. No, you're the guest. Go
I
ahead.
think the best we can hope for now is somebody like a Gorsuch making the majority that this should not be a federal issue and then returning it to the states. I think that's the best we can realistically think for. I don't think we could make it a federal marriage between a man and a woman. I hope someday the government can come to their senses and understand that, but as of now, returning it to be a state issue is the best we could probably realistically hope for.
Which is why that law, I think you said, what, in Iowa or Indiana? Um,
Idaho.
Idaho. I think, more states doing stuff like that will trigger having it to be readdressed by the Supreme Court. Obviously, I think that's
Yeah.
part of the reason why they do it. And I think common sense might prevail. And I'm more optimistic than Joey now. Am I saying I'm 99% optimistic on it? No. But I think in our lifetime it will change again.
Yeah.
So, in one of your answers there, you brought up the N word, right? Nationalism. I had to say I didn't think about that before I was saying.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yes.
Not
Trying
that
to
one. Not go ahead.
Yeah. Not the other one.
But it's kind of the word of our political moment. Um, I think we would all agree, obviously, that there's a sense in which, right, America is a nation, and yet nationalism is still a controversial issue. So I guess you're obviously really focused on liberty, right? You want to bring this message to the young. How would you say the conservative movement coming up should view nationalism, should view this issue of, obviously it comes into borders and laws, who's a citizen, and then compare and contrast that to patriotism, and how should that all shake out for conservatives?
Okay, so I think the first thing we need to understand is what exactly nationalism means, because there has been a sense of what at least was taught in school, that nationalism was simply the love of country above all others, that you think that your country is the best, and I think that is a really bad way of approaching nationalism, because that basically turns all of patriotism into nationalism. When if we truly understand nationalism as this place with these specific borders and this specific kind of ethnicity of people is special and needs to be like ethnically protected, if we understand that to be the true meaning of nationalism, then I think the future right needs to understand that that is very much against what the idea of the United States was supposed to be. Obviously, the country has a right to protect its own borders and control who is and is not a citizen. That's not hateful or racist in any way. However, you also need to understand that the idea that only certain people can become Americans is very anti American in terms of that idea.
it's like the Gipper said. Um, you can move to France, but you'll never be a Frenchman. You can move to
Yes.
Japan, but you'll never be Japanese. But
Mm.
anyone from any corner of the world can move here, and I'm butchering the quote, of course, but basically
Mm.
assent to these ideas, and they can become an American. Um,
Yes.
and I think it was Andrew Clavin who said it, but it's basically nationalism makes sense in France, and it makes sense
Yes.
in Great Britain, and it makes sense
Yes.
in many of these countries of Europe because
Yes.
That's
listen,
yeah.
there is a lot.
America is not their ideal, right? You know, the principles we expound in our Constitution are not those of other countries. So you can understand it and you can see it. But it's funny because they've been undermining their own nationalism for many years with these open border policies, and the they're paying the price at the moment.
Yes,
Oh,
because I
Europe.
think the other thing is
Yeah,
that
Europe.
the way that Americans view patriotism and the way that a lot of Europeans view patriotism and kind of pride in their nations are very separate. Because the US was primarily founded as a set of ideas that were set into name by the Constitution, the US is able to understand that, okay, this is what sets America apart, not race or blood or creed or this or that. And so, with that, we're able to understand that, okay, if you come and you assimilate to these values, that you are an American. Whereas in France, in the UK, in Germany, there is this sense of pride in the nation because of its history, its specific one language that's been spoken for thousands of years. It's one geographic area that has been controlled by this ethnic group for centuries. And with that, it's not like, okay, to take the UK, for example, they don't think of themselves as a superior country because of, for example, the fact that they developed much of the ideals of Western civilization and built up modern industry. They think of themselves as this great country because of this history of one specific people. And with that, that makes immigration, particularly from places that are of the religious minority, very hard in Europe in a way that they aren't as hard in the US.
Hmm,
Hmm. Hmm.
like that. That's a good point. Um, Another question I have about your generation, about your peers. So the sociologist Max Weber, one of the things he said, he taught various students, right? And he had some German students, he had American students, and one thing he said about his other students is he noticed different peculiarities about them as groups. And the Germans were very like studious, like in the books, but they're not going to question the professor. They're not going to raise their hand. They're not going to push it. There was a certain when it came to Americans, they may be sloppier, they may be late sometimes, whatever, but they were not afraid to question authority. They kind of had this independent spirit to try, a new twist at the assignment that maybe everybody else just wanted to kind of go by the book. Would you say among your peers that that kind of spirit of like independence, that kind of American characteristic, is still prominent in the culture?
I would say it's prominent amongst a certain chunk of young people, but not of others, which I would say
Hmm.
it's a small minority that I think are generally very much into engineering. I know that that sort of value of kind of questioning the traditional way of doing things and going around it a more creative way is still very, very prevalent in the technology industry. But outside of technology, not really. It's generally kind of do well in school, defer to your teacher's authority, defer to your professor's authority, defer to your boss's authority. And I think outside of technology, because these way of doing things have been done for decades, I think a lot of young people aren't really wondering, like, okay, why are they done these ways?
I think
See,
we need
that's
a revolution among the young, right? But
Yes.
of thinking beyond just the next 24 hours or the next 6 months, to think long term, because America cannot sustain itself going the way it was going the last 4 years. Let's see what these
Yes.
next 4 years, if there's a sort of course correction. But man, we were going down that precipice fast, Joey.
Yeah.
So I suspected your answer because, and I'll tell you why. I find what you like. Listen, people can say whatever you want about Elon. Sometimes he does some quirky stuff,
Yeah.
whatever. But
Who doesn't
personally,
though? Who doesn't
yeah,
do
exactly.
quirky stuff?
Yeah. Yes.
Who
Everybody
also
has.
doesn't have like what 6 companies and then a bunch of others that he's been part of, and like personally, his space stuff, I find it fascinating, and
Mm-hmm.
yet
Yes.
I'll talk to kids about it, and their eyes will kind of glaze over, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, Fortnite." I'm like, if I was a kid, when I was a kid, if there was a guy launching rockets to Mars, like he would have been like, that's all I would have been able to think about. And yet some of the kids
Yes.
are like, no.
Yeah,
Yeah,
look,
because I remember when I was like 8, 9 years old, loving NASA, loving space, loving astronauts.
that's
I
what I was gonna
remember
say right
this is
now.
obviously before SpaceX.
I have a 9-year-old daughter who loves watching the rockets take off and land, and we have the
Yes.
NASA app on our Apple TV, and she
Yeah,
loves
because
it.
I was
So
obviously born. I kind of grew up when it went through that phase. It was before SpaceX had really gotten super big, so of course they didn't have those launches. But if you were to tell 8-year-old Lincoln that okay, there's not only a space company that will develop cost-efficient rocket launches and do it on a nearly weekly basis, but also that company has a real chance of sending a man to Mars before you are 30, I think this man would go like, okay, this is incredible. How do we do more of this and that? But I talk to 10, 11-year-olds now, they're like, it's just a thing because I think they have only grown up in a world where that was kind of the norm and they don't understand how incredible it actually is.
and I think it's part of the parents too, who the parents. I think many adults. One of the things that I've noticed is that many adults view the world as you can only do one thing at a time. Oh, we
Yes.
got too many problems here in the United States and we need to focus you can do more than one thing at a time and do them well,
Yes.
right? None of
Yeah.
us just do one thing. We balance school, we balance work, podcast, preaching, teaching. We balance things, and it's not like we do them all by ourselves, right? It's not like Elon's running these companies by himself in the sense of he hires smart people to take care of the day to day. He may provide the vision, he's the owner. And so, yes, let's explore. Let's explore. I'm all for it.
Amen.
Hey, I would have volunteered to go to Mars if I wasn't married and
Yes.
3 kids.
When they start doing
Yeah.
commercial flights to Mars, I'm going. I don't know how I'm going to pay
Yeah.
for it yet, but I'll figure it out. I'm
I
going
would love to
Mars.
go to the
Yeah.
moon, but my wife forbids
If
it.
Jesus doesn't come before that, I'm going to Mars.
Yes. Yes, I do have a promise to myself that if it ever gets to the point that I could personally buy a commercial ticket to the moon or Mars, like I'd just be like the first one to try to order it.
So,
Because
look,
it
I don't want
would
to be on the
probably
first flight. I want to be on the second successful flight.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
well,
okay,
wow.
like first flight in the sense of first commercially available one.
Yeah, exactly. By the time it's commercial, they should be better situated. Let me
Yes.
ask you, um, you are into politics. You are into trying to get the young your age to value what they have here in America and fight for freedoms. Have you ever considered running for any type of office?
I think once I'm done with my education and am in a state that permits me to do so young, I think I would consider going for a public office. But I probably only want to do it in a way that would not require it to be like a full time job. In the sense of, I would be totally willing to go and be a member of the Utah State Legislature, where you meet up every summer for 45 days, and then you go back to your regular job. I would not be willing to go to the California State Legislature, where I make more money, but I'm only being a legislator, which I would not want to do that full time.
Okay.
So, since we're back on politics, when you look at the world stage, obviously there's stuff to be depressed about, But I think there's some promising things. So I'm going to have a two-part question. International leaders, right? Like, who would you say, who do you see as kind of the promising political figures as far as a Reaganite, like a conservative is look at it, would look at things? And then domestically, are there any politicians, any people in elected office that give you hope for the future of the country, of the conservative movement?
Okay, so I'll answer the international part first. I think of the international leaders that take traditional Reagan conservatism most purely, I'd say the number one in office now would be Javier Milei in Argentina.
I
I
know you were
think
going to say.
he is doing a really good job of actually bringing Austrian economics in practice in government, which we haven't truly seen in decades. I think he's the best one in office right now. I would say people that will be coming into office in the next couple months would be Pierre Poilievre in Canada. I think he's also been
Yeah, I
able
was
to
gonna
position
ask you
himself in
about
very
him.
traditional conservative way of thinking. And the question about who domestically do I think I have the most hope in, I would say I actually do like current Governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, quite a bit. However, I think he is a little bit kind of a little too let's get to some consensus. But I think I'm not sure if he would be willing to go, okay, at what point do you say, okay, this is a core principle, we're not compromising on this? I'm not sure where he would go with that. I think in the next couple of years, I will see more promising figures in the country, but I think it's being more orthodoxly followed internationally. And I do have a theory for why that is that I will explain to you guys later.
Well, you might have to get to it because we don't have much time left. But let me
Oh,
ask you,
yeah, yeah.
what do you see post Trump?
I think I will see a big sort of schism in the Republican Party between those on the more J.D. Vance side, the very traditional populist kind of economic interventionist side that really push for the kind of tariff aspects of Trump. And I think you'll see the other more traditional conservative side that supported Trump out of convenience of getting Republicans in power. That I think, like, okay, now we need to get to proper conservative governance. So I'll have to see who ultimately comes out in that fight, but I think that will happen once Trump leaves office.
Joey, your thoughts? I don't think I've asked you. What do you see post Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, and this is what kind of terrifies me, is I think we're going to get I think we're going to have probably two fairly good years as far as the executive orders and the Congress being in the hands of Republicans. We'll get some good policy, but ultimately, I think Democrats are going to do well in 2026. And I think we're going to have an emboldened Democratic Party in 2028 that is not going to have learned anything and is going to be like
Mercy.
Biden 3.0, only more alive, maybe.
Or
Um,
or
and then I
maybe
think in
or
2032,
maybe or maybe Obama 4.0, because many people say Biden was Obama 3.0.
well, that too. And I think 2032 is basically going to be that civil war that Lincoln referred to. But I just see it. Again, I could be wrong, but I think Democrats are probably going to win in 2028. But
Yes,
we'll
I
see.
would say so, because this is also lays in my underlying theory that I will
Okay.
then explain to you guys.
No, go ahead. Go into it now.
Oh, yeah, so
So you
my
think, yeah,
prediction
28? Why?
as to why I believe traditional Reagan conservatism is more popular internationally than it is in the US is the fact that in the US, young people have not experienced like sort of an economic downturn big enough to understand that, okay, government interventionism does not work. Most Gen Z people grew up post 2008 recession, haven't really seen any real economic troubles since then. And they're just like, okay, the government is super involved in stuff, but hey, the economy is going somewhat well, so let's just continue the status quo. Whereas if you go and see in Argentina, where they had like 1,000% inflation, or you go to even a country like Canada, where wages are like 30% lower in Canada than they are in the US, for example. Like, okay, then that starts to get to young people really wake up to, okay, we actually need free market principles, and this is how we're going to get there.
That's a good point. So it's been so good that we've been able to. You
Kick the
can
can
suffer
down the. You can
when you've
kick the
got a lot of
can.
debt.
Yeah. You can kick
Yes.
the can down the road. We've had it so good.
Yes, but I think once we finally have to pay back our debt and have to fully deal with the ramifications of Social Security, then I think there will be a big downturn associated with that. And then I think young people finally start to realize and sort of wake up to the economic truth.
Speaking of economics, and as we begin to wrap up here, Doge, your thoughts on Doge, and do you think, right, because you hear, $1 million here, 5 million there, wasted, and people are aghast. But let's be honest, 5 million here, 2 million there, 800,000 there, towards the size of our economy is nothing. Like, do
Correct.
you think we'll be making some substantial cuts? But when you consider most of that is
highly doubt
entitlement,
that.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. When most of it's
Because
entitlement,
I believe we're on track to run, I believe, a $2.5 trillion deficit this year, which is an increase of like $500 billion as compared to last year. And the thing is that unless, and we were saying, okay, let's want to get to a budget balance solely through cuts, and we're not going to touch entitlements or the military, well, then that means literally eliminating every single other part of the government entirely, and you still wouldn't have a surplus. So the idea that Doge is going to magically get us to economic prosperity and government surpluses is just not realistic unless they actually tackle the true killers of the long-term budget, which is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and kind of Pentagon fraud.
now you bring up the Pentagon, who has failed, what was it, 8, 9 audits, or all their audits in their life?
Yes, basically all their audits.
Yeah, okay. Is it possible to find the fraud and still maintain, the military that we need to kind of police the world?
I'm not sure if you can, because a lot of the main reasons why the defense contractors in our country are able to make so much technological advancement is the fact that they pour billions and billions of dollars into R&D, and that comes from the fact that they charge, in my opinion, too much for some basic stuff for the military that allows them to then take that money and invest in better technology. So if we want to actually fully eliminate the waste and the overpricing that a lot of these defense contractors charge the Pentagon, well, that will just mean less money for them to actually do R&D. It's similar to the issue of, okay, let's get the cost of pharmaceutical drugs down. Well, then that means the pharmaceutical companies don't have any money to then invest in getting new drugs. So it's like, okay, can you?
Yeah, but
Is it
even
really worth
then,
it?
though, like, you remember the story of Rumsfeld right before 9/11, where they said they had lost $1 trillion that were unaccounted for. Well, if it's unaccounted, and as far as my knowledge, they never found out what happened, then is it a computer glitch, right? That they just misspend zeros,
Yes.
or
I believe it was a accounting misplacement.
yeah, or there's some serious fraud that
Yes.
you
Yes,
know.
and
$1
we're talking
trillion,
about fraud in the sense of just defense contractors overcharging us. I don't think you could fix that with keeping the current way of the military. But if we're talking about like outright, the high-ranking generals are stealing money from the Pentagon.
somebody is.
If we're talking about that, then I think we absolutely could stop that and still have a good military.
Let me mention once again a plug for my series in Revelation. In Revelation chapter 17 and 18, there is this lament that the merchants of the earth could no longer do business with the harlot. And when you look at the context and you try to apply it historically, those chapters are yet future. But you see that they're lamenting not that there is judgment coming upon the earth, but they're lamenting they can no longer do shady business. And that's what I'm wondering. Know what I mean? Like USID was sending money to Hamas, for crying out loud.
Yes.
It's like, come on, can we at least? Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I don't want to be pessimistic. Sometimes I'm too optimistic. But man, let's cut the pork.
Yes.
Yeah. What I would say about the Doge and these cuts, listen, I'm simple. Like I said, everybody said I like Elon. I like a lot of stuff he does, certainly in the private sector. I guess my biggest problem, and it alludes to what Lincoln was saying about the fact that where the real spending is, and you were saying as well, Gio, is the kind of disdain that they'll have in their voice for past Republicans who didn't want to do anything. And it's like, that's just not true. So in other words, I'm sympathetic to what you want to do about cutting spending, but what you're saying about these other Republicans, like, you don't actually realize that, like, Paul Ryan would have given anything to fix the spending problem.
Yes, and they act like George W. Bush. They act like he was this guy that was just always approving of big government spending. And they forget the fact that he actually tried to fix Social Security by making it a defined contribution plan. This is going to be an individualized account that you would invest your Social Security money into that would hopefully actually fund your retirement instead of this kind of quasi Ponzi scheme we have going on now, where not even quasi, just straight up Ponzi scheme that the current contributions go to pay current retirees. So you can get your Social Security money as long as you can convince more suckers down the line to pay for it. 35
I did
years
a paper when I was in seminary. I did a paper on Social Security and religious exemption. I found out that there are 3 counties in Texas who opted out of Social Security. Right? And so their government employees contributed to like an S&P 500 type fund. And there was enough years, since that took place that you could see what these private funded people got at retirement versus what your typical Social Security recipient gets. And they were getting 3 times as much as the Social Security people.
Oh, yeah, because if you talk about the 8 or 9% of your paycheck that is taken for Social Security, if you invest that difference into like an S&P 500 index fund, wait 40 years, you'll most likely have millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't actually take out the money.
They were getting close to like, I think it was $6,500 or $7,500 a month compared to.
Oh yeah, because then you'll get the dividends from said stock market fund that will then cover your retirement comfortably.
Yeah,
instead of that current system.
I personally, if you believe in, this is me personally, if you believe in the strength of the United States, as I do biblically, I don't think the United States is going to collapse until our Lord and Savior comes. So if you believe that, right, I would privatize Social Security, meaning not give individuals full carte blanche because
because
people
fully
are
giving
idiots.
Individuals all the Social Security money they put in, that is a recipe for...
but I'm saying the responsibility, where I will still take it out of their paycheck, but put it into S&P 500 funds.
Yes.
I mean, it's 500 of the top companies in the United States. If they all go belly up, we got bigger issues. You know what I mean?
Yes, if the stock market goes to 0 tomorrow, that probably means that multiple nuclear bombs were detonated.
Yeah, Jesus is coming, I tell you that much.
Yes.
Hey, Joey, one last question, and then we'll give Lincoln the final word as we wrap up. Make sure you let people know where they can follow you on Substack.
Yeah, so I think kind of ties different threads together. I'm going to read a quote here, but it's something I've been thinking about, right? All these problems, right? The economic problems and the fact that everybody wants like the kind of the new, the Musks in the party they want to fix it, right? And they want to find all these different tweaks, and they want to say, oh, these old Republicans, they just didn't want to do anything. But I think on that issue and on so many other issues, the real problem is a lack of civic virtue among the people, so that they can't be asked to do big things. Because ultimately, to fix Social Security, right, whether it's privatizing or whatever, politicians have to say to the people, we to be a little crass, we are SOL, right? Right?
Yes.
The system is bad. We've got a lot of problems, and we have to do hard things. We have to ask. We need politicians, and this goes to our populist moment, right? With politicians just want to tell the people whatever the people want to hear. But what we actually need is statesmen who say, no, we need to do hard things for the greater good, for our children, for our grandchildren. But frankly, I think if those statesmen were to arise, the people would just give them the middle finger and be like, no, I'm going to get mine. I wanted to read this quote, and then I'm going to have a question for you about this. But this is Cicero. We all know how he died. Not great. As he watched his republic fade, he said, our age inherited the republic like some beautiful painting of bygone days. Its colors already fading through great age. And not only has our time neglected to freshen the colors of the picture, but we have failed to preserve its form and outlines. So, first question, the doomer question, is the American Republic over? First. And second, if it's not, and I think what your movement is trying to do is revive it, what would you say is the number one thing that your generation would have to do to revive the republic?
Okay, so first off, I do not believe that the American Republic is going to be over. I believe we will have a decade or so of hard times if we want to actually get to this restored part of it. But the idea that the American Republic is just over because we've had 25 years of kind of sucky governance is inaccurate, considering the fact that America is still the most prosperous nation in the world, the most innovative in the world, and compared to a lot of other Western countries, actually more socially conservative in the sense of it's more Christian than a lot of the Western world today.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Lincoln, thank you for joining us. Let people know where they can follow your Substack.
Yes, so you can follow my Substack at Liberty, Liberty, 4FOR, the THE, Young, YOUNG.
Okay, so Liberty for the Young, and do you have an X handle you want to share with people?
At Lincoln Gaffney.
Okay,
Are you back?
No, I had to start a new account and get the handle back. So I have the handle, but I do not have the old tweets. So.
Okay. All right, Lincoln, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch and since perhaps have you on in the future, see what life has in store for you. But thank you for being involved at your age. We need more people to partner up with those at Joey's age and those my age, and hopefully lead a more prosperous America into the future. Until next time on the Geo and Joe. Until next time on the Geo
and Joey show. I hope to see you sometime in the next couple months.
All right, brother. Be well. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.